part 2 of the Stonewall riots. I've been kind of behind, losing space on my phone. I hope you guys all enjoyed some of the Pride stuff. I know we're getting into July, so Pride Month's pretty much over for everybody, but let's see, I'm just going to try to finish this before I lose space on my card and stuff again, so let me see where we left off. Let's see here. I believe this is about where we left off. If not, I'm sorry, but it's about as close as I could get. So, let's see here. So we already talked about that. The only known photograph taken during the first night of the riot showed the homeless youth who slept in nearby Christopher Park, scuffling with police. The Machin Society newsletter a month later offered an explanation of why the riots occurred. It catered largely to the group of people are not welcome in or cannot afford other places of homosexual social gathering. The Stonewall became home to these kids. When it was raided, they fought for it. That and the fact that they had nothing to lose other than the most tolerant and broad-minded gay place in town explains why. Garbage cans, garbage bottles, rocks, and bricks were hurled at the building, breaking the windows. Witnesses attacked the Flame Queen's hustlers and gay street kids. The most outcast people in the gay community were responsible for the first volley of projectiles, as well as the uprooting of parking meter used as a battering ram on the doors of the Stonewall Inn. Sylvia Rivera, a self-identified street queen, remembered, "You've been treating us like shit all these years. Now it's your turn. Now it's our turn. It was one of the greatest moments in my life. The mob lit garbage on the fire and stuffed it through the broken windows. As the police grabbed the fire hose because it had no water pressure, the hose was ineffective in dispersing the crowd. It seemed only to encourage them. When demonstrators broke through the windows, which had been covered by the plywood by the bar owners to deter the police from raiding the bar, the police inside holstered their pistols. The doors flew open and officers pointed their weapons at the angry crowd, threatening to shoot. Howard Smith, in the bar with the police, took a wrench from the bar and stuffed it in his pants, unsure if he might have to use it against the mob or the police. He watched someone squirt lighter fluid into the bar as it was lit, and the police took aim. Sirens were heard, and the fire trucks arrived. The onslaught had lasted 45 minutes. 45 minutes. All hell broke loose. See here. Already gotten the layout, right? See here. The tactical patrol force of the New York City Police Department arrived to free the police trapped inside the Stonewall. One officer's eye was cut and a few others were bruised from being struck by flying debris. Bob Kohler, who was walking his dog by the Stonewall that night, saw the TPF arrive. I had been in enough riots to know the fun was over. The cops were totally humiliated. This never ever happened. They were angrier than I guess they had ever been because everybody else had rioted, but the fairies were not supposed to riot. Excuse me for the derogatory term. As I said, this is quoting. No group had ever forced cops to retreat before, so the anger was just enormous. I mean, they wanted to kill. With larger numbers, police detained anyone that could, put them in patrol wagons to go to jail. Though Inspector Pine recalled erupted with the transvestites who wouldn't go into the patrol wagon. His recollection was corroborated by another witness across the street who said, "All I could see about who was fighting was that it was transvestites and they were fighting furiously." That's the other thing, is people don't realize that a lot of the fighting started with the transvestites, or not really transvestites, but that's what they called them anyways. The TPF formed a phalanx and attempted to clear the streets by marching slowly and pushing the crowd back. The mob openly mocked the police. The crowd cheered, started impromptu kick lines, and sang to the tune of ta ra ra boom da. We are the Stonewall Girls. We wear our hair in curls. We don't wear underwear. We show our pubic hair. Lucien Trescott reported in the Village Voice a stagnant situation there brought on some gay tomfoolery in the form of chorus line facing their line of helmeted and club-carrying cops. Just as the line got into full kick routine, the TPF advanced again and cleared the crowd of screaming gay power. Down Christopher to 7th Avenue. One participant who had been in Stonewall during the raid recalled the police rushed us. That's when I realized this is not a good thing to do because they got me in the back with a nightstick. Another account stated, I just can't ever get that one side out of mind, the cops with the nightstick and the kick line on the other side. It was the most amazing thing. All of a sudden, that kick line, which I guess was a spoof on the machism, I think that's when I felt rage, because people were getting smashed with bats, and for what? A kick line. Christopher Park, where many of the demonstrators met after the first night of rioting to talk about what had happened, now features a sculpture of 4 white figures by George Segal that commemorates the milestone. Craig Rodwell, owner of the Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookshop, reported watching the police chase participants to the crooked streets only to see them appear around the next corner behind the police. Members of the mob stopped cars, overturning one of them, blocked Christopher Street. Jack Nichols and Lidge Clark in their column printed in Screw declared that massive crowds of angry protesters chased the police for blocks, screaming, "Catch them." By 4 a.m., the streets had nearly been cleared. Many people sat on the stoops gathered nearby in Christopher Park throughout the morning, dazed in disbelief in what had transpired. Many witnesses remembered the surreal and eerie quiet that descended upon Christopher Street, though there continued to be electricity in the air. One commented there was a certain beauty in the aftermath of the riot. It was obvious, at least to me, that a lot of people were gay, and you knew this was our street. 13 people had been arrested, some in the crowd were hospitalized, and 4 police officers were injured. Almost everything in the Stonewall Inn was broken. Inspector Pine had intended to close and dismantle the Stonewall Inn that night. Payphones, toilets, mirrors, jukebox, and cigarette machines were all smashed, possibly in the riot and possibly by the police. A second night of rioting. So this is the second night. During the siege of Stonewall, Craig Rodwell called the New York Times, the New York Post, and the Daily News to inform them what was happening. All 3 papers covered the riots. The Daily News placed coverage on the front page. News of the riot spread quickly throughout Greenwich Village, fueled by rumors that had been organized by the Students for Democratic Society. The Black Panthers were triggered by a homosexual police officer whose roommate went dancing at the Stonewall against the officer's wishes. All day Saturday, June 28th, people came to stare at the burned and blackened Stonewall Inn. Graffiti appeared on the walls of the bar declaring drag power. They invaded our rights, support gay power, and legalize gay bars, along with accusations of police looting and regarding the statue of the bar. We are open. The next night, rioting again surrounded Christopher Street. Participants remember differently which night was more frantic or violent. Many of the same people returned from the previous evening, hustlers, street youths, and queens, but they were joined by police provocateurs, curious bystanders, and even tourists. Remarkable to me was the sudden exhibition of homosexual affection in public, as described by one witness, from going to places where you had to knock on a door to speak to someone through a peephole in order to get in. We were just out, we were in the streets. The guys there were so beautiful. They've lost that wounded look that fags all had 10 years ago. Allen Ginsberg. Thousands of people had gathered in front of the stone wall, which had opened again, choking Christopher Street into the crowd, spilled into just adjoining blocks. The throng surrounded buses and cars, harassing the occupants unless they either admitted they were gay or indicated that their support for demonstrations. Sylvia Rivera saw a friend of hers jump on a nearby car trying to drive through the crowd, rocking the car back and forth, terrifying its occupants. Another of Rivera's friends, Marsha P. Johnson, an African-American street queen, climbed the lamp post and dropped a heavy bag onto the hood of a police car, shattering the windshield. As on the previous evening, fires were started in garbage cans throughout the neighborhood. More than 100 police were present from the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 9th precincts. But after 2 a.m., the TPF arrived again. Kick lines and police chases waxed and waned. Then police captured demonstrators, whom the majority of witnesses described as sissies or swishes. The crowd surged to recapture them. Street battling ensued again until 4 a.m. Beat poet and longtime Greenwich Village resident Allen Ginsberg lived on Christopher Street and happened upon the giblet chaos. After he learned of the riot that had occurred the previous evening, he stated, "Gay power, isn't that great? It's about time we did something to assert ourselves," and visited the open Stonewall Inn for the first time. While walking home, he declared to Lucian Truscott, "The guys there was so powerful, they've lost that wounded look the fags all had 10 years ago. Leaflets, press coverage, and more violence." Activity in Greenwich Village was sporadic on Monday and Tuesday, partly due to rain. Police and village residents had a few altercations as both groups antagonized each other. Craig Rodwell and his partner Fred Sargent took the opportunity that morning after the first riot to print and distribute 5,000 leaflets, one of them reading, "Get the mafia and the cops out of gay bars." The leaflets called for gays to own their own establishments, for a boycott of the Stonewall and other mafia-owned bars, and for public pressure on the mayor's office to investigate the intolerable situations. Not everyone in the gay community considered the revolt a positive development. To many older homosexuals and many members of the Machen Society, we had worked throughout the 1960s to promote homosexuals as no different from heterosexuals. The White House in 1969, the display of violence and effeminate behavior was embarrassing. Randy Wicker, who had marched in the first gay picket lines before the White House in 1965, said the Screaming Queens forming chorus lines of kicking went against everything that I wanted people to think about homosexuals. That we were a bunch of drag queens in the village acting disorderly, attacking the cheap. Others found the closing of the Stonewall Inn termed a sleaze joint as advantages to the village. On Wednesday, however, the Village Voice ran reports of the riots written by Howard Smith and Lucian Truscott that included flattering descriptions of the events and its participants: forces of faggotry, limp wrists, and Sunday fag follies. A mob descended upon Christopher Street once again and threatened to burn down the offices of the Village Voice. Also in the mob of between 500 to 1,000 were their groups that had unsuccessful confrontations with the police and were curious how the police were defeated. In this situation, another explosive street battle took place, with injuries to demonstrators and police alike, looting in local shops and artists of 5 people. The incidents on Wednesday night lasted about an hour and were summarized by one witness. "The word is out. Christopher Street shall be liberated. The fags have had it with oppression." And I can't remember. Let's see. Yeah, I did this one. No? Yes, I did. got into. I must have, yeah. Alright. So the aftermath. Sorry, you guys, this is so long, but it's all very important information. And I'm almost done. This one I can kind of summarize, though. Let's see here. The feeling of urgency spread throughout Greenwich Village, even to people who had not witnessed the riots. Many who were moved by the rebellion attended organizational meetings, sensing an opportunity to take action. On July 4th, 1969, the Mashadi Society performed its annual picketing in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, called the Annual Reminder. Organizers Craig Rodwell, Frank Camney, Randy Wicker, Barbara Gifting, and Kay Lushenson, who had all participated for several years, took a bus along with their picketers from New York City to Philadelphia. Since 1965, the pickets had been very controlled. Women wore skirts and men wore suits and ties and marched quietly in organized lines. This year, Rodwell remembered feeling restricted by the rules Kimini had set. When two women spontaneously held hands, Comey broke them apart, saying, "None of that, none of that." Rodwell, however, convinced about 10 couples to hold hands. The hand-holding couples made Comey furious, but they earned more press attention than all the previous marches. Participant Lily Vesens remembered, "It was clear that things were changing. People who had felt oppressed now felt empowered." Rodwell returned, making sure it didn't stop, to New York City, determined to change the established quiet, meek ways of trying to get attention. One of the first priorities was planning Christopher Street Liberation Day. 500 people gathered later in July for a gay power rally in Washington Square Park, followed by a candlelight vigil in Sheridan Square. Let's see here. Within 6 months of the Stonewall riots, activists started a citywide newspaper called Gay. They considered it necessary because the most liberal publication in the city, the Village Voice, refused to print the word gay. In GLF advertisements seeking new members and volunteers, 2 other newspapers were initiated within 6 weeks. Period. One, Come Out and Gay Power. The readership of these 3 periodicals quickly climbed to between 20,000 to 25,000. GLF members organized several same-sex dances, but GLF meeting was chaotic. In late December 1969, several people who had visited GLF meeting and left out of frustration formed the Gay Activist Alliance, GAA. The GAA was to be entirely focused on gay issues and more orderly. Their constitution started, "We, as liberated homosexual activists, demand the freedom of expression of our dignity and value as a human being." The GAA developed perfection and confrontational tactic called a zap, where they would catch a politician off guard during a public relations opportunity and force him or her acknowledge gay and lesbian rights. City councilmen were zapped, and Mayor John Lindsay was zapped several times. Once on television, when GAA members made up the majority of the audience. Raids on gay bars did not stop after the Stonewall riots. In March 1970, Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine raided the Zodiac and 17 Borough Street. An after-hours gay bar with no liquor or occupancy license called the Snake Pit was soon raided, and 167 people were arrested. One of them was Diego Vanelas, an Argentinian national, so frightened that he might be deported as a homosexual that he tried to escape the police precinct by jumping out of a 2-story window, impaling himself on a 14-inch, 36-centimeter spike fence. The New York Daily News printed a graphic photo of the young man's impalement on the front page. GAA members organized a march from Christopher Park to the 6th Precinct, in which hundreds of gays, lesbians, and liberal sympathizers peacefully confronted the TPF. They also sponsored a letter-writing campaign to Mayor Lindsay, in which the Greenwich Village Democratic Party and Congressman Ed Koch sent pleas to end raids on gay bars in the city. The Stonewall Inn lasted only a few weeks after the riots. By October 1969, it was up for rent. Village residents surmised it was too notorious a location, and Rodwell's boycott discouraged business. So now for Gay Pride. Christopher Street Liberation Day in 1920, June 28, 1970, marked the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots with assembly on the Christopher Street with simulations, gay pride marches. In Los Angeles, Chicago, these were the first gay pride marches in U.S. history. The next year, gay pride marches took place in Boston, Dallas, Milwaukee, London, Paris, West Berlin, and Stockholm. The march in New York covered 51 blocks from Christopher Street to Central Park. The march took less than half the scheduled time due to excitement, but also due to wariness about walking through the city with gay banners and signs. Although parade permit was delivered by only 2 hours before the start of the marchers encountered little resistance from the onlookers. The New York Times reported on the front page that the marchers took up the entire street for about 15 city blocks, reporting that by the Village Voice was positive, describing the two front residents that grew out of the police raid on the Stonewall Inn 1 year ago. There was little open animosity, and some bystanders applauded from a tall, pretty girl carrying a sign, "I'm a lesbian," walked by the New York Times coverage by Gay Liberation Day 1970. By 1972, the participating cities included Atlanta, Buffalo, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Miami, Minneapolis, and Philadelphia, as well as San Francisco. Within 2 years of the Stonewall riots, were gay rights groups in every major American city, as well as Canada, Australia, and Western Europe. Let's see here. Both the drag queens and lesbian feminists attended left into discuss. O'Leary was also worked in the early 1970s to include transgender people from gay rights issues because she felt that rights of transgender people would be too difficult to attain. Sylvia Rivera left New York in the mid-1970s, resulting in upstate New York, but later returned to the city in the mid-1990s to advocate for homeless members of the gay community. The initial disagreement between participants in the movement, however, often involved after further reflection. O'Leary later regrets her stance against the drag queens attending the 1973. Looking back, and I find it that so embarrassing because my views have changed so much since then. I would never pick on transvestite now. It was horrible. How could I work to exclude transvestites and at the same time criticize the feminists who were doing their best back in those days to exclude lesbians? In 1977, a lesbian pride rally was organized as an alternative to sharing gay men's issues, especially when Adrienne Rich termed the violent, self-destructive world of the gay bars. Veteran gay activist Barbara Gidding, those to work in the gay rights movement, explaining it's a matter of where does it hurt the most. For me, it hurts the most, not in the female arena, but the gay arena. Throughout the 1970s, gay activism had significant success. One of the first and most important was the ZAP in May 1970 by the Los Angeles GLF. Let's see here. At a convention of the American Psychiatric Association at a conference on behalf modification during the film demonstrating the use of electric shock therapy to decrease the same-sex attraction, Morris Kite, a GLF members in the audience, interpreted the film with shouts of torture and barbarism. They took over the microphone to announce that medical professionals who prescribed such therapy for their homosexual patients were compelled to torturing them. Although 20 psychiatrists in attendance left, the GLF spent that hour following the ZAP with those remaining, trying to convince them that homosexual people were not mentally ill. where the APA invited gay activists to speak to the group. In 1972, activists brought John E. Fryer, a gay psychiatrist who wore a mask because he felt his practice was in danger. In December 1973, in large part due to the efforts of gay activists, the APA voted anonymously to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Gay men and lesbians came together to work grassroots political organizations responding to organized resistance in 1977. A coalition of conservatives named Save Our Children staged a campaign to repeal a civil rights ordinance in Dade County, Florida. Save Our Children was successful enough to influence similar repeals in several American states in 1978. However, the same year, a campaign in California called the Briggs Initiative, designed to force the dismissal of homosexual public school employees, was defeated. In 1979, a national march on Washington for lesbian and gay rights was timed to coincide with the 10-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Some women, according to Lillian Fatterman, were eager to shed the roles they felt forced into playing. The roles returned for some women in the 1880s, although they followed for more flexibility than before Stonewall. In conjunction with the growing feminist movement of the early 1970s, roles of butch and feminine that developed in lesbian bars in the 1950s and 1960s were rejected because, as one writer put it, all role-playing is sick. Lesbian feminists considered the butch roles as archaic imitations of masculine behavior. Author Michael Bronczak highlights the attack on pre-Stonewall culture, particularly gay pulp fiction for men, where the themes often writers to portray their gay characters as alcoholics or deeply unhappy. These books, which he described as enormous and cohesive literature by and for gay men, had not been reissued and are lost in the later generations. Dismissing the reason simply by political correctness, Bronczak writes, gay liberation was a youth movement whose sense of history was defined to a large degree by rejection of the past. Last impact and recognition. The Stonewall Bar and part of building where the Stonewall Inn was located, the building and the surrounding streets have been declared National Historic Landmarks. Before the rebellion and the Stonewall Inn, homosexuals were, as historians Dudley Clendon and Adam Negrani write, a secret legion of people known a bit discounted, ignored, laughed at, or dismissed. And like the holders of secret, they had an advantage which was disadvantage. Too, and which was true of no other minority group in the United States, they were invisible. Unlike African American women, Native American Jews, the Irish, Italian, Asians, Hispanic, or any other cultural group which struggled for respect and equal rights, homosexual had no physical cultural markings, no language or dialect which could identify them to each other or to anyone else. But that night, for the first time, the unusual acquiescence turned into violent resistance. From that night